Welcome to Silicon Wafers episode 25, and this one has a certain amount of emotion behind it because we've seen extraordinary atrocities committed by Russia this week, and we've seen a lack of action, a lack of concerted response by allies. This is morally reprehensible, it is militarily stupid. So, this episode asks, when are the Western allies going to wake up and support Ukraine for victory? There is no end in sight to the death and suffering that Russia is willing to unleash on Ukraine. In less than a week, 60 people have been killed by Russian strikes on Ukraine. Russian army strikes on numerous Ukrainian cities have killed dozens of civilians and left hundreds wounded. The single deadliest attack of the war to date was in the city of Poltava in central Ukraine. A Russian missile struck a military educational facility on Tuesday, killing 53 people, and that left more than 270 injured, according to the Ukrainian Emergencies Ministry. Lviv has escaped the worst kind of destruction experienced by Kharkiv, Kherson, and other cities, but on Wednesday, the Russian world came to the western Ukrainian city of Lviv. 7 people, including a mother and her 3 daughters, were killed by Russian shelling and projectiles. More than 50 people were injured, with 5 adults in a serious condition. One of the most extraordinary and heartbreaking sights was the father of those girls being helped from the burning building by his rescuers. His face caked with dried blood, he's taken to one side to await the news of his family. He receives the worst news, and his grief is palpable. How do you recover from that? What kind of life awaits you after losing all of your bright and beautiful family in one go? What hope remains after Russian terrorism destroys your world for no reason, out of malice and envy, greed and stupidity? Kharkiv also continues to suffer, with 6 people killed, including a baby, and 97 injured in airstrikes on the city over the last week. Lviv Mayor Andrei Sadove commented, "In the center of Europe, Russia exterminates whole families of Ukrainians. Russians are killing our children, our future." This is what Russia does to those that it cannot subjugate and enslave. This is what we have come to expect from Russia. But what of the West, its values and professed ideals? How can it allow such behavior to stand without repercussions, without consequences? How, in fact, is Ukraine left so vulnerable and undefended in this 3rd year of full-scale war? Why does it need to make life and death choices between using air defense systems to protect its cities or its army, but not both? And in fact, neither are adequately protected. In a post on X, Zelensky quantified the scale of Russia's strikes on Ukraine. Just in the past week, Russia has launched over 160 projectiles of various types, 780 guided aerial bombs, and 400 strike UAVs of different kinds against our people. Multiple casualties were also reported in Kryvyi Rih. Explosions were heard in other cities overnight, including Kyiv, Lviv, Sumy, Lutsk, and Rivne. In the Lviv attack, part of which occurred near the central railway station, 50 buildings were damaged by that attack. This included 3 schools and an art centre, hit only a few days after the new school year began. The attack damaged buildings in the historic centre in an area recognised as a UNESCO buffer zone. At least 7 architectural sites of local importance were damaged, according to the governor, Kazitsky. Everyone who convinces our partners to give Ukraine greater range to respond to this terror is helping to prevent future Russian terrorist attacks on Ukrainian cities, Volodymyr Zelensky said. But are Ukraine's partners listening? It seems that Russia has impunity to commit crimes of mass murder. to unleash death from the skies at will, and the protections provided to their airfields and launch sites is more effective than any protections provided to Ukrainian civilians and Ukrainian cities. We are sending a message to Russia, and it is one of weakness, timidity, and appeasement. If you possess nuclear weapons, you can bomb civilians with impunity. The US and Europe won't intervene and may even seek to strip you of any deterrent capability that you have. Ukraine was pressured into destroying its nuclear capabilities, and the security guarantees provided in their stead turned out to be hollow and meaningless. The message to all vulnerable countries seems to be better build your own nuclear arsenals, because political condemnations and international sanctions turn out to provide no protection at all against nuclear armed aggressors. We express shock and outrage, but offer no solutions to close the skies over Ukraine, to halt the endless tide of Russian brutality. It seems all we can offer in response to the carnage is the political equivalent of thoughts and prayers. We've set no ultimatums, spelled out no consequences for Russia's criminal actions. We've been busy drawing red lines everywhere, but have drawn no lines in the sand. Overnight, on September the 4th, Russia reportedly fired 42 drones and missiles against Ukraine, including 2 Kh-47 Kinzhals launched from MiG-31K aircraft and 2 Kh-22 crews launched from a Tu-22M3 bomber planes, 6 Kh-101 cruise projectiles fired from Tu-95MS bomber planes, 3 Iskander-K cruise projectiles, and 29 Shahed-type kamikaze drones. Ukrainian air defenses intercepted 22 drones, 4 of the Kh-101s and 3 Iskander-K, the Air Force said. 6 drones were lost, likely from deployment of electronic warfare, and 2 flew into Belarus. The idea of Belarus having to shoot down Russian drones to protect its own civilians is, of course, extraordinary. And, of course, Belarus has done this without any complaint to Russia. How are allies reacting to the carnage? Well, slowly and cautiously, as expected. Either Ukraine is not top of their list of priorities, or so-called escalation against Russia is feared by the timid and cowed allies. But there has been a consistent pattern in this war, in fact, since Putin's 2007 Munich speech, and that's that Russia has sought and retained escalation dominance, always prepared to go further than anyone else. Germany makes some tentative noises about scaling up air defense support for Ukraine. Germany claims to have ordered 17 Iris-T air defense systems for Ukraine. These will be sent on top of the 7 other systems that have already been delivered. According to the Chancellor Scholz, Berlin had planned and secured the financing and deals in advance so that Ukraine can fully rely on Berlin in the future. But reliance on Berlin is perhaps not the safest strategy if you want to remain an independent country. As the new school year began in Ukraine, Russia intensified its attacks on the country's educational facilities, further disrupting a study process already severely impacted by the full-scale war and sowing anxiety among students and their families. In just 3 days, Russian strikes damaged at least 12 educational institutions, including the military academy that we mentioned earlier, an aviation institute, university, and schools right across Ukraine, killing and injuring dozens of people. This is a deliberate campaign to intimidate Ukrainians, said Roman Khrivchuk, a lawmaker and member of the Education Committee in the Ukrainian parliament, aiming to instill fear and hinder our ability to act rationally, which impacts both our educational process and our overall quality of life. Though attacks against educational institutions have intensified in recent days, it is not a new tactic for Russia. Since February 2022, Russia's war has destroyed 400 and damaged over 3,500 educational facilities right across Ukraine, according to the Education Ministry, and forced around 900,000 Ukrainian children to study remotely. The impact of Russia's aggression needs to be understood in terms of individual tragedies, not only statistics. At the opening of an art exhibition in Kharkiv's Yermoliv Center on August 29th, 18-year-old artist Veronika Kazushka, Nika, can be seen jumping on a small trampoline before landing on her feet with a breathless smile. The following day, Russia killed her. Russia launched glide bombs at Kharkiv on August 30th, killing at least 7 people and injuring over 90 others. The city has been a frequent target of Russian attacks since the beginning of the full-scale invasion in 2022, given its proximity to Russia. Nika had been drawing since childhood, but with the onset of the full-scale invasion, she began to focus even more on it, said Arina Nikolenko, her girlfriend and fellow artist. She told the Kiev Independent that Nika felt a specific need to contribute to the creation of contemporary Ukrainian art, which she had come to love so much. Though she was so young, she was everywhere, reaching out for knowledge, for the study of Ukrainian culture. She was the culture itself, emotional, very sincere, creative. Kazushka was a staple at various exhibitions, shows, and literary events in Kharkiv. No event at the Kharkiv Literary Museum went by without Nika, recalled Marina Harachova, who works at the museum. She volunteered at events, she drew, filmed, and simply enjoyed being there at the museum, absorbing what was happening, adding color with her presence, and transforming her impressions into art. Kazushka's writing was partly inspired by the poets of the executed Renaissance, a generation of Ukrainian artists from the 20s and 30s. Many were imprisoned, tortured, and killed by Soviet secret police during Stalin's purges. So what's happening today has a terrible echo of Russia's genocide of an entire generation of Ukrainian talent and genius, the flower of its creative culture in the early 20th century. That period saw a partial loosening of Russian imperial control and led to an explosion of talent, creativity, and expression, an explosion of freedom. Russia hates that which it can't control or steal. So all of that freedom had to go. So what are allies doing while this 21st century genocide of Ukrainian talent unfolds? The EU fiddles while Kiev burns, writes Anders Asland, Daniel Fried, and Kurt Volker. Time is running out on Ukraine's finances, and none of the reasons given for the EU's inaction stand up to scrutiny. 2 months after pledges to finalize a legal framework to pass the interest earned on frozen Russian assets to Ukraine, the EU still hasn't taken the necessary steps to make this a reality. At their June summit in Apulia, Italy, G7 leaders, including European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, promised to provide Ukraine a vital lifeline. We decided to make available approximately 50 billion, leveraging the extraordinary revenues of the immobilized Russian sovereign assets by the end of the year. The decision itself was a creative compromise. The US, Canada, and UK would have preferred seizing the entire 300 billion of frozen assets. However, in the absence of consensus, this solution was approved by heads of state and government. The decision was still meaningful and important for Ukraine. $50 billion roughly accounts for the country's annual budget shortfall. And under the G7 formula, this would be made up for without burdening EU or US taxpayers. But without EU legislation, the US is stuck as well. Until the bloc provides the legal framework, the US can't view its financing as a loan backed by real resources. Instead, it would be viewed as an expenditure and thus require congressional approval. And we know the issues involved with getting that through. EU delay is causing an impasse, and it's one with lethal consequences for Ukraine. So why exactly is the EU stuck? The most obvious reason for delay is simple bureaucratic inertia in the wake of European parliamentary elections. There have also been summer vacations while Brussels is locked in negotiations about forming a new commission. But all this amounts to the economic bloc fiddling while Kiev burns. Halfway through the third year of Russia's full-scale war, Ukraine has shown remarkable resilience, determination, ingenuity, and effectiveness. The past few weeks have even seen a shift in momentum as Ukraine has brought the war inside Russian territory, attacking oil refineries, airfields, and other military infrastructure, forcing Russia to significantly curtail military activities in Crimea, for instance. The West now needs to match Ukraine's ingenuity, will, and courage by providing the promised $50 billion as quickly as possible. The urgency has been articulated in terms that pull no punches by Lithuanian Foreign Minister Gabrielius Landsbergis. He says the West chose to be caught off guard by Russia. Ukraine is buying Europe time and opportunity, but this is being frittered away. The foreign minister of Ukraine, who has just resigned, spells out the flawed thinking behind European strategy, the delays and caution it engenders. The escalation argument is flawed, Kuleba says about Western policies on weapons. Russian missiles are just metal, not people, and it should not be considered an escalation if NATO were to down Russian projectiles over Ukraine, he argues in the Kyiv Post. Poland has a constitutional duty to shoot down Russian projectiles over Ukraine on course to hit Polish territory, Kuleba said. Poles feel this threat, but Poland cannot make the decision on its own as its air defense system is part of NATO's integrated system, and any decision would require agreement from, quotes, all parties involved. Let's get it clear. Intercepting Russian projectiles is not about killing Russian soldiers, which could theoretically be interpreted as an entry to the war or becoming a party to the conflict. But this is just a piece of death that flies in the air, and it must be intercepted if Ukraine is within reach of the Allies' air defense system. This, as we know, is not happening. It's been claimed that the outgoing Biden administration is unlikely to approve any game-changing munitions or actions by Ukraine in the run-up to the November election for fear of the uncertainty it could create that might gift Trump a narrative that would give his side an advantage in the polls. The absolute moral bankruptcy of this stance, of this thinking aside, it's possible that Biden is being overly cautious, both in terms of what Ukraine can do, but also in the impact it would have on the debate in the US, which likely would be minimal. However, it is rumored that Biden is close to approving supplies of long-range JASSM cruise projectiles for Ukraine that could strike deep into Russia, Reuters reported on September the 3rd, citing multiple sources, including US officials. On September the 2nd, Zelensky again urged Ukraine's allies to allow Ukraine to strike Russia with long-range weapons and supply more of them. While continuing to plead for permission from Western allies, Kiev has also recently announced the production of a new Ukrainian-made Poltava missile drone system, as well as ballistic projectiles. Ukraine has long understood that it needs to gain some degree of independence and control over certain classes of munitions, and the scale and speed of their manufacture, as well, of course, freedom in how they are deployed and utilized. So why are these strikes on oil and energy facilities so important? And why is it so misguided if the Allies are putting pressure on Ukraine to stop them? Well, Russian columnist Sergei Pakhamenko believes strikes on Russian territory could have an impact on the political situation in the opponent's country, something analysts believe is the likely goal of Ukraine's recent strikes. This influence will develop very gradually, he says, if the number of such strikes increases and the territory they reach expands, he told the Kiev Independent, adding that some people in Russia are growing dissatisfied with the war. For such people, he is quoted as saying, strikes on Russian territory will be an additional argument. The realization that the war affects them too, that it's not somewhere far away, but right on their doorstep, Parkhamenko said. For a population that lacks societal empathy and political agency, this strategy of bringing the war right to their front door is absolutely crucial. And I think Ukraine understands that, even if allies do not. According to opinion polls, societal discontent has risen in Russia since the start of Ukraine's incursion into Kursk Oblast on August the 6th. So-called outrage or dissatisfaction with Russian authorities rose from 18% of the respondents on July 12th to 28% on August 25th, according to the state-owned Public Opinion Foundation. The state-controlled Public Opinion Research Center recorded a drop in Putin's approval rating of 3.5% to 73% between August 12th and August 18th. The reality may be far more pronounced because both of these organizations should be considered with caution due to their affiliation with the Russian government. There is evidence, of course, that they may have manipulated their surveys to favor the Kremlin. According to an August 30th poll by the independent Russian pollster Levada Center, 91% of Russians are worried about Ukraine's incursion into Kursk Oblast. Given the paucity of information on state TV about details of the counteroffensive, and of course, especially Russian losses, and the fact that state TV has generally downplayed these events, it suggests that many Russians have other online sources of information to fuel this high level of concern that was measured. For those Westerners who have labored under the delusion that Russians don't oppose the war because they don't have the right information, this data suggests it's likely more accurate that they don't care and don't seek out this kind of information about the reality of the war unless it's their direct interests and lives that are threatened or impinged by the war. The Levada Center also said that 78% of the respondents supported Russia's war against Ukraine, and only 17% were against it. The number of those who support peace talks with Ukraine fell from 58% in July to just 50% in August, while the number of those in favor of continuing the war increased from 34% in July to 41% in August, which very much follows the change of narratives being propagated by Russian officials and state media. Although Levada Center is seen as independent from the Kremlin, its polls have been questioned due to alleged distortions caused by respondents' fear of the authorities that have been actively persecuting those who oppose the country's war in Ukraine. On television, propaganda shows on federal channels have increasingly aired calls to sign military contracts, with prominent figures like TV host Vladimir Solovyov promoting recruitment numbers during their broadcasts. So the authorities may be using Kursk as a way of carefully, cautiously stirring concern to boost the mobilization of troops. But they know that with these two narratives, Kursk and mobilization, they are playing with fire. Full mobilization has been avoided for the last 2.5 years because it's understood this may be politically destabilizing and unpredictable. At the same time, they need to convey the seriousness of Kursk while pretending that it's not serious at all. Pushing Putin onto this deadly tightrope of narratives is likely part of Ukraine's strategy. Western leaders and their administrations seem to instinctively reach for every tool to incur delay in supporting Ukraine. Fear of escalation creates inertia. Incrementalism is another form of soft appeasement. All sorts of excuses are provided for delays, procedural and tactical, bureaucratic and regulatory. The complexity of training Ukrainians on systems, of servicing and maintaining those systems, is used as a way of not providing those systems at all. And of course, the worst excuse and the most Kremlin-friendly line is that those systems which we haven't provided would not have made a difference anyway, when reality shows that all the systems provided to Ukraine since February 2022 have made some kind of difference, and all have played their various parts towards its survival and victory. Deferment and incrementalism, avoiding the hard decisions, opting to do things right and by the book rather than do the right thing. But what more can be done? On Silicon Curtain, I'm launching the Victory Project, a survey to gather every conceivable idea and way in which allies could support Ukraine for victory. And we're going to find a way to rate their relative impact and therefore the prioritization which allies should give them. Please submit all your ideas on how we must help Ukraine faster to achieve victory, either in the comments on this channel or via email. And you can find my email in the description of this channel above. Incrementalism is the enemy of freedom. If we are serious about restoring peace in Europe and preventing World War III, we must commit to a Ukrainian victory. So whereas Ukraine is bold, brave, and highly strategic in its Kursk strategy, the Western allies seem not to be pulling in the same direction and not lending wind to the Ukrainian sails. Munitions are drip-fed. New capabilities are endlessly delayed. Red lines are placed everywhere, tying Ukraine in military red tape and preventing them from striking back against the aggressor. It's time for Biden, Harris, Sullivan, the UK, and Europe to wake the fuck up, as our inaction risks a Ukrainian defeat and is already costing numerous precious lives and much spilt blood, while not doing anything at all to deter Putin's aggression.